Hey everyone, Coach Robert here with another thinking technique. So this one is also for beginning players. It works probably for around like the very beginner level up to about like 800 FIDE. And this technique is for the opening. So many people have come to me, especially adult learners, who just have this question: what do I do at the beginning of the game? It can be really discouraging to lose some games very quickly, and it can also just be kind of confusing when it seems like no matter what you do, it's not quite working. And there's also a certain allure of these advanced strategies that are being advertised, basically saying that some opening is going to solve all of your problems. I think that it's important not to put the cart before the horse. And at the beginning level, it's kind of easy to lean on this heuristic technique. So the idea is knights before bishops. Usually that's how people say it. They say knights before bishops. But you can also add and bishops before rooks. And this gives you a general way to look at developing all of your pieces that's pretty reliable. So let's go through one example here. This is a pretty typical way of playing around the lower rating ranges. And so we start with a pawn move in the center because this opens up our pieces. This is already actually something that people have a hard time to remember, but I wouldn't call this like a heuristic technique. It's just that starting with a pawn in the center of the board is good and easy to remember. So you could keep that in your back pocket as well. But after that, you might think to do a variety of different things. I've seen beginner games continue with like this. They start moving like all the pawns, or they're eager to move the rook. You know, I've seen a tragic number of games where they play like this, and the rook comes out, and then it just gets snapped off by the bishop. So if you're a beginner, look out for that. It's kind of good to take the rook with the bishop early on in this way. And people will frequently do it when they're confused about what to do in the opening. So to circumvent the possibility of going down one of these bad avenues, I encourage people to develop the knights first. You might be wondering, why the knights? Well, the reason is that the knights, being very limited in their mobility, don't have that much to do in the start of the game anyway, so they're a little bit pigeonholed into certain circuits early in the game. This is not strictly true, but in beginner chess, we'll frequently develop the knights just as close to the center as possible. So the center is e4, e5, d4, d5. That's the names of the squares that constitute the center. And if we put the knight on the third rank or the sixth rank for black, it'll control 2 of the 4 center squares. So if I play knight f3, I'm attacking both of them. In fact, in this case, I'm also attacking and trying to win the e-pawn. So black might continue with their own knight move. So if you follow this for white, you might already be attacking on move 2, and as black, you're already defending against threats just by following the simple heuristic method. Now, developing all 4 knights is not really punishable. So if you just go for that, it's not a bad idea in this case. I'll get into why I think this heuristic method is not as strong as some of the other ones in a minute. But you know, once you develop the knights, you might want to develop the bishop. So you'll just have to pick a place for it. Usually, you want to pick a place that doesn't block your other pieces. So here's an example of a good place to put the bishop. Notice that the bishops actually usually have more options than the knights. That's why they're coming second. It's good to play the more non-committal moves first. Since the knights are kind of pigeonholed into certain options, we'll pick those moves first. But for the bishop, it's a little bit more involved, right? Like we could go here, or here, or here, or here. And in various situations, any of these might be good. You might even want to, sorry, it's a bad arrow. You might even want to develop in this direction with your bishop. And this applies to all the bishops on the board. So choosing a place for your bishop is a little more complicated, so it's good to save it for later. That's why we do it later on. So we might do like this, and black might do something very similar. They could even, you know, go further if they want. There's just different options for you. But as long as you're developing the knights and then the bishops, in most cases, that will get you through this early phase. Another good thing to remember is that we usually want to castle our king quickly. So this is a sample of that kind of play. And for some people, this could already be a vast improvement. At this point, they might have already gotten checkmated by like a scholar's mate, or they might have already lost their rook for a bishop, or they might have, you know, abandoned their pawns in the center of the board. So for some people, just thinking about the knights and the bishops and getting them into the game is already a big improvement at the beginner level. Now, the next thing you would want to do is maybe use the rooks, and this is where I start to get into why I don't like this heuristic method that much. So once you've done this, you're actually kind of stuck with the same question again. You're like, where do I put my pieces? That's always the question in chess, right? So if you don't like that question, you should probably do something different. But you know, we're just kind of stuck in the same scenario again. You have to develop some understanding of chess to really get how to manage these problems long term. But it does get you a few moves deeper into the opening without losing, which is why it's pretty good. Another issue that I have with it is there are plenty of counter examples. So here, let's take a look at another example. So for this one, I've chosen to play the London system for white. It's not really important what the opening is if you're a beginner. But this is just a sample where you could start out developing your knights before your bishops. Oh, also white is developing a bishop before their knight. So one of the downsides of the knights before bishops before rooks idea is that maybe you might get it in your head that moving the bishop is just bad. But there are plenty of examples where moving the bishop is fine, like this one. But anyway, let's say that you're playing black and you just go ahead with your knight development, right? We're doing this, and white's doing what they do. Here, if you try to follow that method and play the move knight c6, this is really not very good. The reason for that's a little bit difficult to explain, because it requires some knowledge that's beyond the rating range at which this heuristic method is useful. If you're probably around like 800 FIDE, you might start to run into situations where you can successfully complete your development, but then you'll regret some of your early moves. For instance, let's pretend that we're just going to play a normal opening. This is pretty typical of what you might see in an opening like this. Let's just pretend, right? We're going to just play a bunch of moves. Okay, just like that. Now at this point, let's throw in a bishop move, because you might think knights before bishops, time to move that bishop, right? When you reach this part, it gets rather difficult to choose a move for black. And it boils down actually to something very subtle. It's this pawn on c7 is blocking the queen and it's blocking the rooks. What we would really like to do is play the move c5. So by following this method, you could actually kind of fall into a hole where your pieces are not in harmony. But that's a problem for a higher rating range. So if you're still a beginner, you should try to use this method. It will probably help you out. So that's my spiel about this one. And I hope you guys liked it and that you'll check out my other videos about thinking methods in chess. Take care.